Welcome to the Brendan G podcast. My name's Brendan G, and I think we got a pretty exciting show for you. We have a special guest, Dr. Jason DuBois. And one of the things that we're going to talk about at the end of this is bioprospecting. And it's essentially if you are a skeptic of the natural products industry at all, and you are solely sold on the pharmaceutical solutions, this is something that you're not going to want to miss. But first, I want to introduce Dr. Jason DuBois. He's a board-certified physician and a registered pharmacist, educator, and founder of Hybrid Remedies, which is a really good natural supplement company focused on immune health. He graduated cum laude with a doctorate in pharmacy from the University of Florida. Go Gators! Over 18 years of pharmacy experience in both retail and clinical research. Specializes in immunology, and was at solid organ transplantation. He was involved in solid organ transplantation at the world-renowned Mayo Clinic, solid organ transplant clinic. And he was definitely an early skeptic of natural supplements. Welcome, Jason. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Probably one of the first questions I want to ask is, so you went through the juggernaut of becoming an MD, and yet here you are, sort of a passionate advocate for the natural supplements industry. That is an unusual road to take. How did that come about?
That is a question I get often, but I do have to clarify before we go further. I have a PharmD, not an MD, so it's a slight difference. They're both doctorate degrees, but I focus on the pharmacology and the drug side versus an MD that focuses on more the patient, more health and wellness on that side. So
that's a good
very
clarification.
similar, but different paths. Yeah,
right. More clinical research side of things.
More nerdiness.
More nerd. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get that a lot as a molecular biologist. Okay, that makes sense.
I can imagine. So yeah, my story is a little bit different than probably what a lot of health food entrepreneurs are. You know, these guys that create supplements, a lot of them have no medical background in them. So it's refreshing to be with you, Brendan, that has a scientific background. And my journey, it was unique. The irony of a lot of times people ask me like, okay, well, how did you, Jason, go from what you were doing? Because I was the lead clinical pharmacist at that organization. I was working for Mayo Clinic for well over 15 years. And I had specialized, as you mentioned, in the field of immunology and organ transplant. And I loved what I did. Like I was involved with the beginning of organ transplant at the Jacksonville campus clinic. We created a liver transplant clinic to start, and then we went on and added a kidney pancreas program, a heart, and a liver transplant, a lung transplant program. And my role for the team, I was the doctor behind the scenes that was involved in designing the immunosuppression protocol. So when someone gets a new organ, let's say you or a loved one needed a new liver, after the surgery, you have to put that person on a series of different drugs. Many of them are immunosuppressant drugs. Some of them are antibiotics. There are certain protocols that have to be followed, and that was my role. So I was essentially the doctor on the team behind the scenes that would put you on a series of drugs to protect that new liver.
Right, because immediately like said,
the body did it for many years. Loved that career. The irony of the story is that if you and I had met 15 plus years ago, you would have figured out pretty quickly I was not a big believer in natural remedies. In fact, I often describe myself as like the Darth Vader of natural, right? So I was like your worst enemy. And the short version of the story is it wasn't until I started meeting my patients in the outpatient clinic. So they'd go through the transplant and then I'd meet with them. And that's where I would get a lot of questions about natural products. They underwent this life-saving transformation, this like literally a new lease on life,
right,
with the new organ they got. Right. And then they would have an epiphany. They'd like, okay, I want to do things better now. And a lot of that started in the outpatient clinic. And they would come to me and they'd say, hey, I want to try a vitamin. I want to try a natural remedy. And as the pharmacist for the team, that was my role. My role was to kind of guide them, and a lot of those questions would come to me. So that's where my journey into natural remedies really started. And from there, it kind of like exploded.
Oh, so that's interesting. Okay, so you came at it from the angle of the patient. You're constantly having these conversations with the patient, and the patients are sort of pushing you down this road, probably hesitantly at
Pushing me.
first, right?
Well, the answers were brutal. I mean, it was like, absolutely not. This stuff is garbage. It can
Right.
actually
The stuff
interfere.
that we constantly hear from conventional medicine all the time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'll be candid because I don't often tell this story, but the reason I decided to study this, and so I started researching um, natural remedies, and I don't know if you guys remember, it was back in early 2000, and there was a super popular immune supplement that came to market called Airborne. You remember that one?
Oh, yeah. That was made by a teacher
Okay.
or something, wasn't it?
Right.
Originally
School teacher
formulated by a
formulated.
teacher. Hmm.
Right. Somehow she masterminded this amazing remedy that could just support the immune system. And I,
Right.
at the time, was a super skeptic, but it was like everywhere. I mean, that
Yeah.
product was just absolutely exploding. And so, being in the field I was, a lot of my friends and family would come to me and they would say, "What do you think of this supplement? Like,
Yeah.
do you think it actually can benefit? Do you think it actually could work?" And as a pharmacist, as a person that's focused on data, I didn't go on like I did go on a biased whim. I was like, absolutely not. But then I decided, let me actually do some research. Let me
Right.
not be so biased that I act like I know everything, and actually look at what the ingredients are and do they actually work? Could they work? Right. And I started this journey with complete arrogance.
Yeah.
I started this journey with
This is very
the
honest.
intent of,
This
right.
is good.
No, I started this journey with saying, I know I'm right.
Right.
Now we're just going to go and prove it.
Right. Yep.
And I started. It was a heavy bias. I was super skeptical. Now through that journey, like I started researching the ingredients in that product, but I didn't stop there. I started researching many other different ingredients. And
Yeah.
here's the weird part: the more I researched, the more I really like took time and started to read the clinical trials, because there are clinical trials published
Yeah.
on natural ingredients, and some of them are good and some of them are not. And I read
Right.
them all. And what I thought would be a weekend project took me 2 years. And
Wow.
in 2 years' time, I had researched over 200 herbs. I had read way too many clinical trial
Yeah.
papers to remember, probably hundreds, if not upwards of 1,000 papers. But in that journey, I transformed my beliefs, and that's the only way it could have happened.
Right.
So you weren't going to tell me it worked. I had to prove it to myself. So it's kind of like the C.S. Lewis, right, story where the guy that went out to disprove the Bible
Right.
ultimately
Right.
became,
Yeah.
one of the biggest Christian advocates ever. And
Yep.
that's a little bit about me and my journey and how I got to where I am today. And shortly after that, I started trying to research my own product that could help support the immune system. Ultimately left Mayo Clinic to start Hybrid Remedies, and the rest, as I say, is history.
Yeah. I will say, because you left a pretty prestigious job, and
Yeah,
I'm guessing that it paid well. And
yeah,
I'm in the supplements industry, and it's a trick to not only to make a good product. You have no problem doing that. You got the background for it. It's perfect. But now to make it successful and to leave something that is, again, good paying job, regular checks. All right. Tell me a little bit about that path.
yeah. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. And I had this idea for a product. I had done about 5 years of research. The first product I ever developed was called Hybrid CR, Rapid Immune Defense.
I'm sorry. It took you
Um,
how many years?
yeah, it took me 5 years.
5
5 years.
years. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the first 2 years were just dedicated to learning about the ingredients and figuring out what ingredients would work best together.
Yeah.
And then the next 2 years was devoted to finding a contract manufacturer that was willing to make the product to my specifications. And that was the biggest
Right.
challenge. It wasn't that you couldn't get the ingredients or they weren't out there, but I wanted certain aspects of the ingredients because I knew if I could isolate certain ingredients out of the natural material, I could actually create an amazing remedy
Give
that
me an
actually
example.
enhanced the immune response. And that's what took me 2 years. I was knocking on a lot of doors
Yeah.
for contract manufacturers. I was contacting people overseas to find the best raw materials in the world.
Oh, wow.
And there might have been someone that could have done it faster, but my perfectionism just prevented me from, making decisions quickly. But it ultimately paid off. That's the good news.
It makes an efficacious formulation, no doubt. Give me an example of one of the ingredients that you really focused on and wanted to make sure the specs were just perfect.
Okay, so one example is one of the key ingredients in our formula is called echinacea. Now, everyone knows echinacea. Like, it's just a common herb. But what's interesting is that there are 9 species of echinacea grown in the world. There's only 2 of them that are really used in the U.S., Echinacea purpurea and Echinacea angustifolia. Those are the 2 primarily used. When I was doing the research and I read every clinical trial ever published on echinacea, and it's somewhat of like 200 plus clinical trials published. If you divided up the clinical trials, the data was split in the sense that there were like half of the clinical trials said echinacea had very little efficacy and you shouldn't use it. And then the other half of the clinical trials showed good efficacy and benefit for the immune support.
Yeah.
I researched both. So I divided it into both categories. I did a meta-analysis on both of them, which means that I did a deeper dive on the data. And I found some epiphanies, some things that were very consistent in the clinical trials where the echinacea worked, and also consistencies where the echinacea did not work. In the clinical trials where the echinacea was effective, it was consistently the purpurea species.
Yeah.
It was always in the root. So anytime you use the leaf, it wasn't as effective. Something about the echinacea purpurea in the root told me to look deeper. And that took me a few years to figure out, but I found out there was one key constituent that helps support white blood cell activity very, very well. And it's called chicoric acid.
Okay.
And if we go back, 5 years ago, I would have never told you that. That's like a top secret. I'm sure my competitors will probably jump on that now, but chicoric acid.
Hopefully they won't listen.
Yeah, they'll skip over this podcast for sure.
Right.
But chicoric acid is something that it took me a while to not only find the raw material, but then get a manufacturer to isolate it properly.
Right. Was it being isolated in the market at that point?
So it's there are various grades of standardization, and not all herbs are standardized. So you first have to find a good raw material source. And then ideally, you want to find a contract manufacturer that's already isolating that property.
Right.
And then the last step of it is purity. Like, how pure do you want that to be? And so there's various grades, and it's usually reflected in percents. So you could have like a 1% all the way up to 100% in the natural industry. So,
that makes sense.
That's the tricky part, is figuring out what plant do you want to use, what part of the plant is most effective, and then is there something you could isolate out of that plant that really makes it very, very effective. Now, if you contrast that with other brands, like you can get echinacea anywhere, right? You can go down to Walmart and get echinacea right now.
And it is everywhere. I agree.
And it's everywhere. It's definitely everywhere. I'd say the biggest difference between what I'm doing and what many, many other people are doing is just really honing in on the part of the plant that's most efficacious.
Yeah.
Now, I'll give you another example if you don't mind.
Please.
So another key ingredient we use in our product is Panax ginseng.
Oh, yeah.
Well-known herb, right? It's been around for 5,000 years. Within the root of the echinacea plant, there are 30 properties that we know of. The benefit of standardizing it is when you isolate certain properties out of the root, you're essentially excluding other properties that you don't want. And the thing with
Right.
echinacea, or I'm sorry, the thing with Panax ginseng is it has properties that are not good. As we know, like Panax ginseng can cause side effects like rapid heart rate, anxiety,
Right.
jitteriness. Panax ginseng is used as the whole root in the energy drink. So when you look at certain energy drinks, things like Monster and Red Bull, they're great if you want a rush of energy because you're getting all of those components in the root.
Makes
But
sense.
that's not something you want in a product that's going to help your immune system.
No,
So it
I
really goes
agree with
back
that.
to figuring out what you want to isolate. Can you
Mm.
isolate it? And then you'll get a much more therapeutic effect.
See, this is the difference between really good formulators and well-formulated products. You know, people end
Mm-hmm.
up walking down the supplements aisle and they're just inundated, and a lot of times they think that you know, all immune products are relatively the same. They have zinc, they have echinacea, they've got a couple of other things. Okay, so I'm going to reach for the cheapest one. This is an
Yeah.
excellent example of why that does not work, and why there's a lot of folks out there that say, don't even bother with the supplements. They don't work. Choose a pharmaceutical substitute. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And people get enticed by price. I think we all do, right? We
oh
all
yeah,
want the best product for the lowest possible cost. But I liken, here's a great analogy that I like to give people because our product isn't super expensive, but it's not like super cheap. You know, like you can get like a bottle of echinacea for $5, right?
right,
And our product costs, closer to $20. The example I like to give people is like a hamburger, right? You can get a hamburger anywhere, right? So you can go to White Castle and get a White Castle burger, and that's going to be like $2 and change. Or you could go to your favorite steak restaurant and get a nice, juicy, delicious steak burger, and it's going to
right.
be closer to $20. Right? Your expectation level of what that's going to taste like is going to be vastly different, right? So think of it in that way. Like you do get what you pay for, and the
Yeah,
companies that are selling these $6 products, and I see them on Amazon, I see them on Walmart, I see them on
yep,
TikTok now. It's like $6 for 120 capsules. It really upsets me because people are getting duped. Because there's absolutely, I'm telling you, like I've seen it all. I'm on the formulation side of products. The only way you can create a $6 supplement that has more than one ingredient in it, you're cutting some serious corners on
yeah.
quality.
You're right. Exactly. You're undercutting all the efficacy of the ingredients completely, and you're going with the cheapest. I always tell people, you know, if you go out to a raw material supplier, they're very honest about their grading system. You can go with a grade A or you can go with a grade F, and there's a huge price difference. So a lot of people
Absolutely.
are choosing
Yeah.
those grade Fs. I agree with you. Yeah, wholeheartedly. All right. It's interesting. I think, you know, I don't want to, there's something I would like to say. I'm going to say it slightly differently. A lot of these white papers,
Mm.
I you kind of have to figure out who's paying for it, and then you have to figure out what is their ultimate conclusion that they want to arrive at. Because, like what you said, you know, you've got these 8 or 9 different species of echinacea, and if you don't choose the right one, you'll definitely prove that it is not efficacious at all. And we
Hmm.
see that a lot in white papers. So you did the due diligence, and you found out that you found something that was really good for the immune system. But, you know, unless you have the kind of background that you and I have, you could very easily pick up a white paper or turn on the evening news and they end up quoting
Yeah.
something incorrectly
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
study itself was improperly put together.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
purposefully in many
The
cases.
So white papers are the worst,
Yeah.
and the better information is going to lie in the actual clinical trial. But even
Yeah.
then, the clinical trial cannot be powered well enough, or the clinical trial may not be done properly, um,
Yeah. We're
or the
talking about
results may be
controls and
interpreted.
dosages, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. So um, you have to kind of be very mindful that it helps if you're trained in medicine. It helps if you know how to read clinical data and interpret
Yeah.
it. The average layperson cannot do that,
Right.
and it's tough. It's tough for them to figure out, what's truthful, what's not.
Jason, you brought up a really good point, and I think that it's kind of important maybe for the viewers to understand that the industry has actually been under attack for a long period of time.
Mm,
And I know we're going to talk about this when we go to a conference next month, but it's interesting that the pharmaceutical industry has not been able to get a foothold in this industry, yet they're going ahead and they're purchasing some of our biggest brands.
yeah.
And I think that that might be diluting the formulations because they end up basically they don't have the same philosophy that we do, and they don't support the industry the same way that we do. And it's questionable whether they want the efficacy at a very high standard just in general. So I don't know which one of those topics you want to take on, but it definitely needs to be
Uh,
addressed.
when I first started into this industry, I was coming from the medical pharma world. Now, I wasn't like working for big pharma, but I was exposed to that, and I
Yeah.
I know what their overall intentions are. And the overall intentions are generally good,
Hmm.
but always the big thing is does this make us money? Is this
Right.
profitable? And I think every major corporation has that. But when it comes to the natural world, one of the great things about the natural industry and independents like us in particular is we are always putting the needs of the customer first.
Right.
Um, and yes, ideally, if we do that right, as a result, we benefit. We'll profit from that. Whereas big corporations, they're under a lot of stress to be able to perform. So they want to come in and already acquire a winning line, and that makes sense. That's good business sense. But on top of that, they're going to want to make it even more streamlined, even more profitable. And
Right.
there are different ways you can do that. One of the ways is to change the formula, and
Yeah,
ultimately, we're seeing that happen.
they've got their quarterly semi-annual meetings with their investors, and they're looking at the bottom line, and they are looking at where they can cut things and how they can push more products into a health food store or into food, drug, and mass. And a lot of people,
It-
because they don't have a relationship with a small independent health food store, they get kind of easily duped into taking a product that actually might not work very well. Whereas if they end up choosing a company that is still owned and operated by the founder that has the philosophy of, hey, I'm here to help you. This is the reason I got in this. I don't necessarily, I just need my lights paid. They'll pay my light bill and that's fine. Don't worry about Wall Street. It's a completely different outcome. I agree with you.
yeah, and it's in big pharma is starting to take bigger slices of the independent pie, and the problem with that, because independent brands only make up about 20 to 25% of the market. So a
Yeah.
majority of the supplements that you see, especially if you go into a pharmacy, right? So I'm not even talking about health food stores yet. I'm talking about you know, the independent pharmacy, the CVS, the Walgreens, those shelves are all owned by big pharma,
Right.
GSK, Procter and Gamble, Johnson and Johnson, um, even those wonderfully designed vitamin products. There's big pharma behind that,
Yep.
and that's a concern on multiple levels.
Yeah, and I've talked about this in a prior podcast where we went over A lot of the vitamins and minerals basically coming out of a test tube as opposed to being, coming from food. And the body does not recognize those the same way. They don't assimilate them the same way. And in certain cases, actually are nutritionally detrimental to the body. People don't realize that. Those enriched foods, they've stripped everything out and then they've dropped these things in so that the supplement panel will look right. But it literally does damage the body. So something to avoid and something to definitely take into
Yeah.
account.
And
But
I always try to like encourage anyone I talk to go to a health food store to, if you want to get serious about your health
yeah,
and you don't want to get duped and you want supplements that actually can work, go to a health food store.
yeah,
And I would say the same thing for like medical advice. Like, find a good pharmacist. Make sure that a pharmacist is part of your healthcare team. A good pharmacist will give you the truth, and you may not like the truth, but a good pharmacist will give you the truth.
yep. Well said. I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah.
And so far we're the only health professional you can just walk up and talk to for free. Make
Yeah,
an
that's
appointment.
very true. That's a very
You
good
know,
point. Yeah. And
so
I agree with what you're saying on the health food side too. I mean, I've run into a lot of health food store owners that, I'm very hyper focused in one particular area. I know it very well, liver and gut health. Okay, fine. That's great. These guys are a jack of all trades. They've seen everything. They've heard from everybody. They know
yeah,
what their supplement aisle looks like. They're very good people to tap and see if you can get a solution that gives you something of a better outcome than what you would find in the pharmaceutical solution toolbox, let's say.
yeah, yeah.
All
I
right,
still remember. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so here we go. You've left a lucrative, prestigious position, and it's taken
Yeah,
years for you to develop this highly efficacious formula. You're super excited about it, and as soon as you open the doors, I am sure everyone flocks right to you, and you had no problem selling this whatsoever. And you're sitting on the Isle of in the Bahamas as we speak, right?
yeah. So none of that happened. In fact, the complete opposite. I still remember the first product was the hybrid CR dose pack. I wish I had a sample of it here, but the hybrid CR dose pack was the first product I ever developed. And man, it was a mess getting that to market, but I finally got it, and I was married at the time. I was I was still didn't have an office like I do now,
Yep.
and the smallest order I could do was 10,000 units. So I had 10,000 units of this stocked in cardboard boxes to the ceiling. Every room in the house was full, and it's you think I'm so smart, but I'm so stupid at the same time because I didn't think about the marketing and the distribution aspect of it. So I did, I called a distributor. I was like, well, let me just,
Mm-hmm.
so who does this? Like, I call up a distributor, and I remember having a very interesting conversation because I told them about my product and how awesome it was and who I am. They didn't care who I was, by the way.
Right.
And they said, that's cool. Tell me how many stores you're in.
Right.
I go, well, that's what you're supposed to do. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
right. I
in
was going
zero
to say
stores.
that's your legwork, not mine.
I'm in zero. Like, that's your job. And then the conversation ended pretty quickly after that. And I realized that the only way I was going to get this company off the ground was to become a salesperson. I'm not a
Yeah.
sales guy. I'm a science guy. I'm a
Yeah, me
pharmacist.
neither. Yeah, exactly. I could
And
totally understand that.
I threw a bunch of product in the car and got in the car. Thank God I was, living in Florida, which is like the supplement world,
Yeah.
or at least one of the biggest states. And just would go store to store to store to store, and I would be from 8 in the morning, 8 at night. If that store was open at 7 o'clock at night, I'd go in there and pitch it, and the owner wasn't there at that hour. I didn't realize that,
Yeah.
but I would pitch my stuff, and got a lot of no's, a
Yeah.
lot, a lot. But ultimately, I eventually did get a yes, and started to refine my pitch, and got more yeses and got reorders, but it was a good year and a half just solo until I was able to convince a sales rep, an independent sales rep, to come on board. Humbling, but I learned a lot.
Yeah, it's hard starting a business, and particularly in this industry, because you're right. If the the big boys already have that network in place when they come out with a new product, it's very easy to get it on every store shelf across the nation. But if you're just starting out, those doors are pretty closed, pretty tight, I would say. So it's a tough
Yeah,
road.
there's more competition now than
Mm.
there ever has. So when I was doing this, it
Especially in
was
your
about,
category, I think.
especially my category in the immune, health and wellness category. But in 2012, it was still hard. But for someone to do it today, you're going to have some pretty deep pockets. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you have some really aggressive internet brands that have come
Yeah,
on and, you know, just kind of just have a lot of money to be able to kind of bully their way in. And
yeah,
it doesn't mean that they're better products. It just means they got deep pockets to make moves. So, not only are you up against, kind of big pharma wanting to get a piece of the pie, you're up against internet brands that, didn't really support the industry like the way that you and I have.
yes.
And it's just, there's just endless competition now.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I feel the same pain that you do, and it's tough. Um, but I think we've gone about it very similar ways. I have some of my own stories about how I've sort of how I've specced out certain ingredients, and yeah, that's the road. It could be a daunting one. It's interesting that you came from. See, I wasn't. I didn't come from the clinical side per se, but I did come from the pharmaceutical industry. So I saw the business model sort of for what it was, and I didn't really like
Yeah.
it very much, and I didn't really feel like that was benefiting people. So I dropped into this one, and that kind of dovetails into what we're going to talk about next. If you want to jumpstart us, so this is, uh, let's say, in a kind way, this is the pharmaceutical industry sort of borrowing from nature. So, what
Hmm.
kind of pharmaceutical drugs have come out on the market that really has their roots in nature? For those people who are skeptical about walking into a health food store and think that the only thing that really works and is efficacious comes out of a pharmacy, this would probably be a really important part of the podcast for them to be paying attention to. Do you have some examples of those?
I mean, I think the classic examples, and I have some classic ones and I have some more recent ones
Yeah.
that I can bring up. But like the classic one is like the age old, like opium plant, right?
Yes.
That from the opium plant, pharmaceutical companies were able to come in and refine it into, pain medications that we're familiar with, like oxycodone and morphine,
Yep.
and derivatives of that. And that was kind of like one of the early examples. Another one is digoxin, which is a cardiac medicine. It's was introduced, I think, in 1930, but it originates from the foxglove plant. The
Oh,
foxglove
interesting.
plant came, contains digitalis, and
Hmm.
out of that you can refine it into the branded drug called digoxin. So
And that's
history
probably
definitely
gone
lends
through
itself.
several iterations, I would imagine, since the 1930s.
Sure. I mean, not as many as you might think.
Mm.
And it's interesting is that, a lot of the pharmaceutical drugs that we have today uh, originated in one way or another from nature. There's very
Yeah.
few 100% synthesized products that can be created in a test tube. So big
Right.
pharma owes a huge debt of gratitude toward Mother Nature, and we continue to
Our
learn from
creator.
Mother Nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of important for the folks who don't have a whole lot of background in our industry to understand that the pharmaceutical industry, in order to protect their product, they have to patent it. And in order to qualify
Yes.
for a patent, they have to have something unique. They can't just straight up patent something that's came out of nature. That is more or less what we do. They have to take something, extrapolate, isolate, and change it in some unique way, and then go through clinical trials and put it on the market. And then they've got some protection for 20 plus years or so. So you're right. I mean, I don't think a whole lot of people understand that almost everything that they take from the pharmaceutical industry has come from nature.
Yeah, the issue I have is when big pharma will find something that's working really well on a natural, completely natural
Yeah.
level, and then acquire it, and then
Yeah.
make an attempt to patent it, and then try to phase it out of the natural health food
Oh,
stores. Does that
that
make
never
sense?
happens, Jason. I don't think that's ever happened. I mean, just in the past couple of years, they tried to do that with N-acetylcysteine, which is like a base amino
Yes.
acid, right? So
Yes.
we've been successfully using this for like 40, 50 years. And then the FDA says, no, we're going to classify this as a drug and take it off the market.
Well, that's an interesting story because NAC or N-acetylcysteine was actually patented as a drug first.
Yep, that's true.
So it was used in two different forms. One was Mucomist, which is an inhalation product that's like a mucolytic. We still use that in hospitals today. The other one was acetadote, which is like an intravenous form for Tylenol overdosing. We also use that product as well.
Oh,
And that was like
to protect the
one
liver.
example where it's interesting. So it's technically classified as a drug,
Mm-hmm.
and it's listed as such with the FDA, but the natural industry somehow has been able to use that product. It did undergo some scrutiny in the last few years where it actually, the FDA started to kind of stir the pot and want to take that away from the health food
Right.
stores.
Right.
And I think that's one of the few battles that we've technically won. So
Yeah.
it's definitely considered a drug, but for FDA is leaving that one alone. Now, conversely, you look at an ingredient like omega-3.
Mm-hmm.
Omega-3 fatty acids have been around for many, many years. And it wasn't until like just recently, like in early 2000, that there was a company, GSK actually ended up taking omega-3, which is found in every health food store, and turning it into a patentable product that was being sold as Lovaza. It depends on how you feel about that, but it's just like that's one instance where it's like big pharma is like taking their hand and dipping it into the secret sauce that we find only in health food stores, and then patenting that. And there's always a concern whenever that happens is if they patent something, now it's classified as a drug, they
Right.
technically could push back into the industry and tell FDA, like, no more omega-3.
Right.
It's now a prescription item. That's the rub. It's because they can do that. Once something is classified as a drug, the FDA technically could enforce that.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. It's a double-edged sword, right? So if they end up doing something that enhances its, I mean, if it's an omega-3, what's the application? Is it cognitive or cardiac?
No, the application is to reduce triglyceride levels
Triglycerides.
and,
Okay,
and
yeah.
cholesterol. But the problem is they didn't do anything different. So it'd be one thing if they took a naturally occurring ingredient and manipulated it into something that is a lot more effective. Maybe they
Right.
added a hydroxyl group or some kind
Right.
of carbon atom, whatever. And now it's from nature, but it's distinctly different than what truly exists in nature. That's a
Yep.
patentable thing.
Yeah.
And that's what our current laws are supposed to support. But what GSK did was they just took omega-3 in its existing form. They didn't change it in any way. They just concentrated it. So is that patentable? It shouldn't be. But they
Oh,
did. And they
interesting.
brought it to
Okay.
market as a drug.
Yeah, that's totally different. That's completely different. Okay.
So the patent laws are supposed to work actually in our favor in the natural industry,
Yes.
at least in the US. Over in Europe, the patent laws are different. You could actually patent a naturally occurring ingredient in Europe if you can show that it has a different utility, like it actually has a purpose. Like, I'm going to patent this ingredient because it lowers blood pressure.
Yeah. Yep.
So you can actually patent an ingredient for that in Europe, but not here in the U.S. You're not supposed to. So
They seem very
but that
strict
was just
about.
one example.
Yeah, they seem very strict about natural supplements over there in the EU. We have a lot more flexibility over here in the States. So there's a number of differences between the drug patentability and also the supplements industry as a whole over there. It's just almost non-existent. But
Do you remember when? I mean, I'm sure you do, when CBD like hit the market.
oh yeah,
Um, and I remember going to, I can't remember what year it was. It was like almost overnight, where like I was going to the trade shows, and like one year I just saw like a CBD like hemp booth,
yeah,
and then the next year it was like 5 more companies were like now
yes.
selling CBD and hemp, and
And
it
then it
just
was
kind of
like
like
almost everything,
exploded.
it seemed like, had CBD in it for sometimes
Yeah,
for no apparent reason.
yeah. But we went through like a weird quasi phase where it was like, is this a legal substance or
Mm,
is this not a legal substance, right?
yeah.
And there was like, it was questionable. And at one point, there was actually like a lot of, I don't know if you remember, there was like raids on health food stores in certain
Yeah.
states.
Right.
So the federal government was classifying it one way, and states could take a stronger stance.
Yeah.
And I think it was like in Illinois that they were actually going in and raiding health food stores and clearing their shelves of CBD. I know of certain people that have like, I've read stories where they've been like incarcerated because they were like carrying CBD with them, like,
Oh,
and
on an
on a
airplane.
flight,
Yeah.
on an
Yep.
airplane.
Yep.
Um, and it's just, it's just crazy that, we have these natural remedies, naturally occurring remedies that really don't have laws against them, but just on how certain states want to interpret it and enforce it, it can be illegal to have in
Yeah.
essence.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Um, and just to dovetail onto that is that there was a company that actually took CBD in its natural form and patented it into a drug. So I had some notes on this. GW Pharmaceuticals actually took CBD.
Yeah.
This was back in 2018, and they patented it into an anti-seizure medicine called Epidiolex. Epidiolex. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but and
So
that's
what
still
was the
a
uniqueness about
patentable.
that? How are they able to patent that?
So these are great questions I don't have clear answers to. Like, how can you take
Yeah.
an ingredient that's naturally occurring and change it in a way, change it to a patentable
That's interesting.
formulation? I don't believe that naturally occurring ingredient is modified in any way.
Yeah, that is definitely not the
Um,
way the laws should
they
operate.
they right. So what they did was they were doing ongoing clinical trials, and they found that, hey, this works in children with this
Mm,
certain type of seizure, and they brought it to the FDA, and they were able to get it approved as a drug.
wow.
Um, so
Interesting.
maybe that it's not patented, but it's definitely classified as a drug. And so
Yeah.
the concern is, anytime this happens, I always have this concern of, well, if it's listed as a drug, they could push the FDA to enforce removal of CBD.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
And
Um,
it's a fine line. It's a very fine line.
yeah. In preparation for this, I did a little bit of snooping around on uh Pub what is it? PubHub?
Yes,
Anyway,
PubMed.
PubMed, thank you. I use that thing all the time. I'm not quite sure why I stumbled on that. But I found a study. It was a Journal of Advanced Pharmaceutical Technology, and we'll put this in the show notes. The title of this is "Natural Products Derived from Plants as a Source of Drugs." So, in case you wanted to get a little bit deeper in this and find some other examples like the ones that we talked about, but it's interesting. They have a statistic here. This is up to 50% of the approved drugs in the last 30 years are either directly or indirectly from natural products in the area of cancer, which is the third rail of our industry, and we do not deal with. But just one little caveat here. We talked about painkillers, and there's cardiac drugs, and so it's chock full. And let's see, of particular interest from my standpoint is silymarin, which is an extract from milk thistle, and it's used in the treatment of liver diseases. And of course, that's also something that we have in some of our products as a liver cleanse. But yeah, it's patented and used in the pharmaceutical industry, but comes from nature. So interesting.
Who knows what'll happen next, though? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like you never know with the direction that big pharma is taking, because there's the more and more consumers are looking for natural alternatives.
Yes.
Hands
Yeah,
down. We've
I
seen
just don't
this.
think they trust the pharmaceutical industry like they did years ago. And I think it's a generational thing on top of that.
Correct. Correct.
They've
So
probably seen their parents who, take more pills than they have meals. And I think that they're like, look, this is going in the wrong direction.
yes, yeah, I totally agree, and I think where I was going was that business is going to follow the customer.
Absolutely.
So if more and more people are turning to natural, which is a great thing,
Yeah.
and kind of turning away to a certain degree pharmaceuticals, then what you'll see a pivot in the industry. So you'll start to see bigger companies start to produce or acquire natural supplement products to be able to garner that market. And that's where, I begin to have concerns about big companies kind of dominating the industry. Uh,
Yes. Yeah. It's the
because it
camel
makes it,
putting its
it,
nose
it
underneath the tent. Absolutely.
well, it's going to make it very difficult for me to compete and also come up with new products.
No, yeah,
Um,
no doubt about that. Yeah, it will handcuff us. But I think in particular, I think the events of the last 4 years did a lot of damage, and also the opioid crisis. And so I think
Absolutely.
both of those things are huge drivers for why people are saying, you know what, there's got to be something better out there. What is it? Let me find it. And so, yeah, I think, and the pharmaceutical industry is full of very intelligent people. They understand what has taken place. They've had a hand in it, no doubt about that. And so I think that it makes perfect sense for them to come over and say, all right, no problem. We've got plenty of money. Let's just buy up a lot of the supplement companies. And if we can't put them out of business via the FDA, because they pay 75% of their expenses, we're going to do this in a slightly different manner. This is a chessboard. This is not checkers. So
Yeah.
people need to be aware of that. And Jason, it was awesome having you on here. We're going to have to do this again in the future, no doubt. Is there any social media? Where can people find you?
People can find me on TikTok and Instagram. You can also find me on Facebook. I have two channels. One is Hybrid Remedies. That's my brand name. And my other page is Dr. Jason DuBois. Definitely find me on Instagram and TikTok. I do a lot of great informational videos, stuff that you won't expect me to talk about. You'll
Yeah,
really enjoy those
I've
tools.
seen a few of those. People should definitely check that out. And where can people get a hold of your immune products?
So we're sold in health food stores. You can find us on Amazon. You can find us directly on our website at hybridremedies.com. Those are the main channels that we are on currently. And then throughout the country, we're in hundreds of health food stores. So if you don't
Yeah,
find
those
us in a health food
independents.
store, you can find me on the web. So, but
Fantastic.
thank you so much, Brendan, for having me on. Really enjoyed the show and
Oh,
appreciate it.
it was an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And again, if the viewers like this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel. And we got more podcasts like this coming up. So stay tuned.